I was wondering if we could start by setting a little bit of context. You joined Robinhood almost 2 years ago, which was really sort of the beginning phase of a really rapid period of growth and scaling for Robinhood. So can you give us a little bit of context and bring us back to that moment in time where you first joined Robinhood? Where was the engineering organization at when you came in? And what were some of like the classes of challenges that you were dealing with then?
Yeah, going back in time. So I started almost 2 years ago, actually, soon after the pandemic started. And it was remote. Now we talk about being remote, and I think people are just very used to it and are used to working in that environment. But at that point, it was still fairly new. And I honestly, I mean, I was very excited about joining the company given the mission and just where things were. But I didn't realize just how much opportunity there was. And I saw that firsthand when I started. But from an engineering point of view, we were just seeing massive scale in 2020. And there had been a pretty massive outage actually before, just a couple of months before I started. My biggest priority actually when I came in was how do we have a more steady pace of development and really trying to understand like, hey, where are teams in that evolution and how are teams scaling from a technical point of view given the increase in load and to put that in numbers. We actually saw 10x traffic increase in 2020.
That's pretty extraordinary when you think about it.
Yeah, and when you think of that number, it's you have to really look at all of your systems and see how they are architected. And we were a pretty young company. We our first iOS product launched in 2015, and so really thinking of, hey, do we need to rebuild this entire service or re-architect the system? And what I did was really just actually focused on two main things, which was focus and prioritization. Like I firmly believe that you have teams that sort of uh, they might be treading water, and I think it's important to identify when that's happening. Where you plug one hole, and then you see another hole, and you like put a band-aid on top of it, and you have this false sense of progress almost. And so I think it's important to sort of spot when that's happening. And the good news is, whenever you're scaling, and again, we're not talking about people, just when your systems are seeing so much scale and load, and you say, oh, we have so much technical debt. What's really important in that scenario is it's you just have to prioritize fixing those problems. And sometimes people have this tendency that, okay, I'm going to do this short-term fix, and okay, great. Like when I see another incident, I'm going to work on that fix. But really going in and identifying the root causes and giving teams the time to tackle those, I found is actually the most important aspect.
The false notion of progress is really important thing to point out because that could people may feel satisfied by fixing stuff. Like they can see the immediate impact, but longer term, they might just accumulate more tech debts.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that as a new leader coming in, one thing that I found very valuable is that I could just be a voice for what people were experiencing. Like teams and individual ICs know what the problems are, right? So honestly, like I would recommend for every new leader, just go on a listening tour and you just become a spokesperson for them. So what I heard from many people is that, hey, like we have all these priorities coming in, we have so much to do to just shore up our technical foundation. And then I could just help with making sure that the what we were prioritizing and what we needed to do sort of all match together.
Could you share a couple examples of that? Because I think when you shared the identifying teams treading water, I just had this really vivid image. I don't know if you've watched a lot of pirate movies, but like people on the bottom of a ship trying to plug a hole, plug a hole, plug a hole, and it's still filling up with water, and people are, you know, trying to deal with everything at once, but maybe like that progress isn't happening like you're sharing. Do you have an example of some of those areas where you helped create that focus and prioritization to help, I guess, transcend that and or maybe even on the other side of it, like some of the ways that you advocated for people, because I think it'd be really curious to hear what those conversations look like.
Yeah, so one clear example I'll call out is you have to look and identify the choke points. So what that means is you have certain teams that end up becoming a bottleneck, and you see a lot of other teams kind of depending on them. So when I came in, there was this one really important product priority that we wanted to work on. And I said, some people were telling me like, hey, we're not making progress here. And when I actually looked at it, it was that that team depended on our core brokerage team, and they just had all these scaling challenges. And so in that situation, actually, the specific team within that organization, we looked at how many engineers they had and how many priorities they had coming to them, and it just didn't add up. And so, really, what we did, me along with my product counterpart and the leadership of the team, what we said is that, hey, let's just map out and see, okay, if you have 10 engineers on the team and you have, in that case, I think it was 6 projects, like how is that actually going to match? Like how many engineers do we actually need for each project? And then we didn't make the decision on which one to not do, but what we said is we know we can't do all of it. And so here are some ways of prioritizing these things. And then that was a conversation with our CEO and other leaders that, hey, here is the reality. So let's try to figure out kind of what decision and how to make those trade-offs. And it was actually an extremely productive conversation. I think that sometimes people think like, oh, you can't push back or you can't challenge these decisions that have been made earlier. And actually, what I've found is that if you go in with sort of explaining where things are and being clear on why you can't do all of it, you can actually have an extremely productive conversation.
I was going to ask you about the approach to that prioritization conversation because the priorities versus the number of engineers not adding up, I feel like it's such a relatable experience for so many people. Can you share a little bit more about how you would enter into that conversation or navigate that conversation with the CEO or other executive team members?
So there are moments when it's very clear you can do this, which is around planning, right? And that's where you sort of really work on mapping these priorities. The example that I was giving when we did this was actually outside of planning because we were just finding that, hey, we're not making progress on this project, and there's a very clear reason why. So in that case, we just put together this case and I went and audited what is the team that's bottlenecked here? Why are they bottlenecked? Like really understanding that, hey, like why do they have so many competing priorities? Because sometimes maybe it's actually more straightforward to say, hey, like these things are just not as important. But what I found is as we went through it, it actually wasn't straightforward to say that, hey, you can just stop doing this. Like I think in that scenario, it actually just was a case that we were trying to do more than we could given where the technical foundation was. I will say that, as engineering leaders, it's very easy to just say, oh, the technical foundation isn't where it is, right? Because there's this sense of perfection and it's very hard to achieve that. You'll always find some gap in your system. And so I do think that you have to take that extra critical eye and really understand or really be able to make the case on, hey, why is this technical debt that we're seeing like really impacting things? And in our case, we were seeing outages. And again, like I think every company goes through this and is able to tackle it. So these are solvable problems. And I think that's actually the other angle I would recommend people thinking about, which is these are not insurmountable problems, right? So when you make that case to other leaders, especially outside of engineering, I think it's important that like, hey, we're not going for this ideal world of no technical debt. It's just that here's the impact of not focusing on it. Like the impact of not focusing on this technical debt is that we're going to see outages and there will be this false sense of progress because every time the engineers try to focus on some product work, they are going to have to go on this outage and solve that. And so I think the best way to put it really is you are treading water at that point.